Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining our today's panel. The topic of today's panel is Interfaith Dialogue, Common Values and Traditions. My name is Angela Domasova, and I'm the founder and trainer at Luxembourg School of Contemporary Etiquette, and I'm also the member of Anna Lindh Foundation Luxembourg. And today's event is organized in the framework of Anna Lindh Foundation Virtual Marathon for Dialogue. Religion is an indispensable part of culture, and discrimination in many cases manifests itself under the guise of religion. Discrimination in the name of religion demonstrates not a clash of cultures, but a clash based on ignorance. There are many misconceptions about our religions, and on the one hand we have misunderstandings, but on the other hand we have common values, common traditions. And that's why it is so important to build dialogue between our cultures and religions. And by supporting such a dialogue, we can prevent formation of stereotypes and prejudices. For the panel today, I have invited representatives of the three Abrahamic religions, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. They are all local influencers in interfaith dialogue. Beginning to my right, Dr. Alberto Fabio Ambrosio, Professor of Theology and History of Religions, Luxembourg School of Religion and Society. In the center, Rabbi Alexander Grodensky, Liberal Jewish Community of Luxembourg. And in the far right, Dr. Shams Al-Hajjaji, a scholar, postdoctoral research associate at Walter Shakin Institute of International Law, Germany. At the roots of our religions is peace, and we call upon the same God, God of Abraham, Moses, Jesus, and Muhammad. And I want us today to spread a little light and to focus not on our differences, but on the things we have in common, on our similarities. Peace comes through actual building of understanding, and it is important today to get to know each other on a human level, to get to know each other on a personal level, to find understanding and build trust. And we're going today to speak about our religious traditions from the perspective of etiquette, guiding rules and values. And I want us to speak about our modern traditions, however, with reference to the roots, to how these traditions were formed and described in scriptures. So let us start with the first topic, which is common and very close to everybody: relationships, love, and marriage. You remember that in scriptures, Abraham, he didn't have any marriage counselor. And of course, when he had a dilemma with Sarah, his wife, he turned with a question to God, and he asked God to explain how to behave, how to find the right behavior with Sarah, his wife, and Hagar, his wife's maid. And God gave him a clear instruction, as clear as possible. And it's the entire biblical guide to a happy marriage is just one sentence. Everything she says to you, listen to it. So here I have the three questions to you. What is the attitude to relationships in a marriage in your traditions? Are same-sex marriages allowed? And what is the attitude to inter-religious marriages? So we could start with anybody who wants to start first.
I mean, thank you very much. I was not expected to begin with this question, but it's very simple for a Catholic priest, as I am, to give an answer. It's very simple because in reality it's very complicated. So as you know, in Catholic Church, especially in Catholic Church, priests particularly don't get marriage. So the question is, the marriage in Catholic Church is very important and is very the celebration of marriage is too important. At the same time, in Catholic Church, according to the Catholic Church doctrine, the marriage can also, in a way, hang up because of the celibacy, because of the vow of chastity. So in a way, it's at the same time very, very important, and there is a kind of relativization of the marriage itself for other kind of love. So I think that the marriage is still very important for Catholic Church, but of course, we are also aware about the difficulties of this sacrament. As a matter of fact, the marriage is a sacrament for Christian, especially for Catholic Church. And for me, it's not so simple to talk about. It's very simple to talk about Catholic Church, but Christianity is not just Catholic Church.
What else, if not just Catholic Church?
You have Protestants, you have Orthodox, and I just mentioned the most important trends and churches in the Christianity, and then you have Anglicans, you have evangelical. So Christianity is much more than Catholic Church. And for example, for the marriage, all the Christians celebrate the marriage, but it's not exactly the same. In Protestant churches, they are still asking themselves if marriage is a sacrament or not. In Orthodox Church, the sacrament is very important, but there is another discipline than the Catholic Church.
And are same-sex marriages allowed in Christianity, in your tradition?
In Christianity is a good question for Christianity, because for some churches in Protestant, let me say in Protestant evangelical, it can be, not yet, or maybe never in the Catholic Church. So it's a very tricky question specifically for Catholic Church. Not yet allowed same-sex marriage. But maybe it could be
in the future.
Well, the same idea with as Christianity is very wide phenomenon. Judaism is, although it's a very small religion in comparison to the world religion, Christianity or Islam, Judaism is very diverse. But maybe one of the key ideas about marriage, doesn't matter whether it's Orthodox, liberal, or in between, that marriage from the Jewish perspective is a partnership. It's obviously a holy partnership, and there is a certain expectation from the community to participate in it, with ritual, rabbis are involved, there's special rituals around it, how to establish it, how to resolve it. Divorce is also possible. So marriage is not so much a sacrament, but it's a social institution. And that's why, as any social institution, it evolves. So the biblical marriage, many people think it's such a wonderful thing. They forget that biblical marriage is polygamous. Women are playing the second role, if any. You mentioning Sarah and Abraham, it's a very nice story, but there are all other different stories in the Bible where you can find very passive women and or very patriarchal context. So the sort of the beginning point of all discussions on the ethics of relationships, marital or extramarital, is about mutual respect between the partners, and the starting point is the beginning of the Bible, where God says it's not good for a human being to be alone. So that's why, from a liberal perspective, it does not matter much whether it's man-woman or man-man, woman-woman, or so basically loving, caring relationship between two people is, at least from a liberal perspective, which I'm representing, is worthy of celebration, of blessing, and yeah.
Does it mean that same-sex marriages or interfaith marriages are allowed in your religious tradition?
So it's kind of two different questions. Same-sex marriages is one thing. Let's say two Jews coming together under chuppah, under canopy of marital canopy. The interfaith marriage is a very hot topic and very controversial. There are rabbis who are very open about it and trying to help people who are in this relationship to find their way into Judaism for Jewish and non-Jewish partner, and to invite both of them into the Jewish community, being proactive and trying to, basically saying that Judaism is not just a clan religion or ethnic religion, it's a universal religion, and even if you're not converting, there's something in Judaism that can be attractive for the non-Jewish partner. There are rabbis who are very negative about interfaith or mixed marriages because they believe that this is the end of Jewish continuity. So the statistics is a very tricky thing, but there's some people use statistics to show that children resulting from mixed marriages are usually not really Jewish in behavior and commitment. The question is, of course, what's the reason for this? Is it because the community rejects this kind of children, and that's why they're feeling rejected and not really being part of the community? Or is it something essential in the relationship that makes continuation of Judaism through generations impossible or difficult? So it's a big question and very controversial, especially in continental Europe.
How does Islam, from the Islamic perspective, from a perspective of a Muslim, what is marriage and what's the attitude to marriage, to interfaith marriages, to traditional family?
Okay, so for Islam, the marriage has two sides. One is the spiritual side, and one is the legal side. So marriage is a word that an offer by a man to a woman. So would you marry me? And she say yes. That's a marriage. So we need two witnesses, and then we need a dowry, a consideration for the marriage, and then we have the contract. That's it. The written part, it is not mandatory. The recognition of a sheikh or any person specifically is not requirement. Even the legal requirement to register the marriage is relatively new. So it was introduced early in the 40s and the 50s of the last century. So it was not really that so. And until today, we have what we call as a customary marriage. So a man can meet a woman and then they can write a contract that she's my wife and I'm her husband, and so on. But that's not only the marriage. So the marriage has some consequences. So when a man marries a woman, they have some consequences. So this said that the man is responsible for the woman. So the woman can sue that man for alimony, for child support, and same thing, the man cannot say this child is not mine, so the child is by default is his, even if it's not, but it is his. If a man died, the woman takes inheritance in his money after his passing away, so it has some consequences. The spiritual part, in my perspective, is just not to any part of the contract to misuse it or to take advantage of the other. So it is not someone is going to declare that now this is a holy relationship. It's a holy relationship, so you have to take care of it. And that's at that point we take to the legal part. So the woman can write whatever she wants in the contract. So she can say, I will forbid you from marrying more than one, or I want you to pay me that amount of money every month. She can write, as long as the requirement or her terms does not contradict some other verse in the Quran, then it's perfectly, she can edit that.
It quite goes along with what Abraham was told by the God. Just listen to what your wife is telling you.
In one side, it is right, but the thing that so she can put her terms in the contract, but then the Quran gives them the man what we call it qawama, and qawama is like the leadership or like to be the captain in the ship. So and a ship cannot have two captains. At one point, yes, a woman would put the terms, what she wants, how she wants this, the general lines, and then the man will lead the ship. Definitely, the man will be outside, the woman be inside. This would be the customary things. It's not, maybe they both work outside or both work inside. Islam will not interfere in that. How they distribute the work between themselves, Islam will not interfere in that. But just put that thing. The idea with same-sex marriage, if you put it from in this spot again and you look at it as like a contract, there will not be children because naturally there's no children in this relationship. Scientifically, there's no relationships. You need a third party in the relationship. So the only thing that we are talking about, and then the second thing also, sorry, is that Quran prohibit the action of not man like a man or a woman like a woman, but the sexual relationship. So if a man like a man or a woman like a woman, that's fine, but as long as they resist their desires for having an extra fears. Even the Quran, not for the same sex, but also for difference of both sex, heterosexual things. So if a man like a woman, he cannot simply having a relationship with her. If you like a woman, marry her. And then in the chapter of the women in the Quran, the women of the Quran, you will find that the Quran said that okay, you cannot first you cannot marry the woman that your father used to marry sometimes, and then it listed 13 types of women that man cannot marry, like the mother and up, and the daughter and down, the cousin, the sisters, the breastfeeding mother and the breastfeeding sister. And then the second verse, it's going to say, and no other women, you should not have any relationship except your wives and what you own, which is now no longer exist because there is no slaves, so no one owns any woman. So now either this woman is your wife, so you have a relationship with her, or not, then not. A same-sex marriage, so the contract, that Arabic contract would not be recognized mostly in Islam because it will not have the consequences of having children naturally, and adoption in Islam is forbidden. So they cannot adopt, they can make something called, we call it kafala, which is supporting a child, but you cannot give him your name, or he cannot take part of the heritage once you pass away. And then the other side is that the God that bans the same sex itself.
I am not a Muslim and I am in love with a Muslim man. What shall I do?
The original rule that Muslims should marry a Muslim, this is the principle. But exception rule that God had made in the same verse of the Nisa is that the Muslim can marry people of the book. So the Christian, the Jewish, and the Abrahamic religion, what they call Sabi'in. So the people who just believe in God but they don't have a book. But the question rises regarding these. Is this right is limited to men? And there is a wide consensus among scholars that it's only limited to men who can marry non-Muslim or people of the book women, but women cannot. So this is part of the debate, which I'm not really into this debate, but just there is a debate whether it's women and men can do it equally or just men can do it.
As far as I can see, we have very similar things, like marriage is a partnership, marriage based on love. Do you agree, Dr. Ambrosio?
Yes, I agree, and I would say a little bit more, because in Catholic thought, marriage is even a friendship, not just a partnership, but a friendship. And even Pope Francis reminded in a letter, official letter 2 years ago, that the marriage is a friendship. And when we say what is the friendship, the idea of sharing feelings, experiences, and thoughts and events and projects is this idea of friendship fits really into the reality of a marriage as a friendship. So yes, it's a partnership, and more, I would say more for Christianity and Catholic, especially Catholic idea is a friendship. That's why, in a way, sex is so important, at the same time not so important, because it's first of all a friendship, and in friendship we can really sharing everything, included of course sex. I would also add, because I didn't talk about the interfaith marriages for Catholic, this is very important because since the Second Vatican Council, the interfaith marriages are allowed, so there's no really problems for interfaith marriages. At the same time, there are some other advices that, as Professor El Hajjaj said, I mean, in a way, in Catholic Church there is also we encourage the same Catholic marriage. I mean, between Catholics, but in theoretically speaking and also practically speaking, there's no problem for interfaith marriages. I celebrate myself more than one interfaith marriage.
Interesting. Anything else on this topic, or we move on?
Well, formally speaking, from a legal perspective, love is not part of the marriage. You know, if you're from Islam point of view, from Jewish point of view, I don't know. I guess.
Also, I can agree.
So nobody really asks at the beginning whether you love each other or not. It's about really caring relationship. And coming back to the sex issue, procreation is not really mandatory in Jewish tradition. It's nice to have kids, but it's not necessarily the requirement to establish a marriage, for example. If people cannot have kids, even if it's a heterosexual couple, they still can be married and enjoy life together, use contraception and so on. So it's a wider understanding, and of course, depending on which community you're part of, the real way how the marriage works, whether the partners really partners, standing equally, or it's more traditional understanding that man is the captain of the ship. Although in the more traditional Jewish family it's vice versa. On paper, maybe man, but very often the woman has the active part. Yeah, it's there's kind of theological construct, and there are cultural inputs and influences depending on where you live, and especially when you're talking about etiquette, so it's very culturally rooted.
Yeah, and speaking about cultural traditions in a family or in at home, it's about time to speak about hospitality. And hospitality also, we find a lot of scenes where hospitality was described. And let's go back to Abraham. When the three strangers, you remember, came to, they were angels in fact, they came to the doorstep of Abraham. He did his best to welcome them so that they could feel as comfortable as possible. So the question is, what are your traditional rituals of hospitality? How do you set up a table? Okay. You feel free to... no specific order.
No, it depends, frankly, on the place where you're talking about. So it's tradition. I came from South Egypt, and they say that the foreigner has 3 days, full 3 days, where he or she shouldn't do anything. You should take care of their boarding, their food, their clothes, everything until 3 days. So after the 3 days, they become part of the house. So they should participate in whatever the house is doing. So if we're cooking, they should cook. If we are cleaning, they should participate. But until the 3 days, they are fully guests that she shouldn't do anything, nothing. But this is now not the case, especially in the cities, big cities like Cairo or something like that. So usually people will host you for a lunch or a dinner, and mainly it would be like mostly the Western culture, where you have the fork and a knife, and you have the plates, and also you would not do anything during this lunchtime or dinner time, but yeah. So there's no big difference now in the cities, but in like the rural areas where I used to, my family used to be, this was the culture, that the 3 days you don't do anything.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Any religious tradition in Catholicism, how to show hospitality?
Yeah, for the hospitality in Catholicism, the best model is the monks' hospitality. I mean, I was thinking about the St. Benedict rules, and then, I mean, the monks were the real hospitality place in Europe, and I think that a lot of rules, you said, also are very important for Christianity, Catholicism, and I mean, the idea that, let me say, a foreigner, because I guess it's not, is a foreigner without being really a foreigner, is welcomed in the community, living with the monks, and sharing the table, and so on and so on. So the model of hospitality in Catholic Church is given by the disciplines, the rules, the institution of hospitality in monasticism, as a matter of fact.
And any specifics in your tradition?
I mean, very traditional, especially when you're talking about religious context. If new people come to the synagogue for the service after that, usually somebody would ask whether you have a place where you can go and eat Shabbat dinner. Big synagogues usually have also organized services for this. So like there are people, volunteers, who are in charge of distributing the guests. In Israel it works very well. In Luxembourg not that much, but it's again a connection to the local ethos, how people behave here. In general, it's more about like Western society or urban society. You get an invitation 2 weeks ago in advance, and so on. So it's not that different.
And if I'm not a Jew, can I enter the synagogue?
Of course, yes.
Shall I be welcomed?
Well, of course, depends on the synagogue. They're very closed, not only for non-Jews, but also for the Jews who are not part of this club, let's say. There's also issues of security, so usually you have to register before, because we have to be sure that people who are coming are not dangerous. This is the reality, unfortunately. But in general, in Luxembourg especially, or my synagogue, we are a public space, so everybody can come. Everybody who is not threatening the order, yeah, so participating in everything.
Part of etiquette, of course, is image and style. And there are a lot of traditions about fashion and look in your religious traditions. So what are typical fashion requirements in your religions? And do they have any spiritual meaning?
Terrible question. Terrible question, because I'm doing a project, a research project on fashion, and so I'm in the topic since 4 years. And let me say, I would say two ideas about fashion as vestment, fashion, and Catholicism, especially Catholicism. Catholicism had tried to give an idea of modesty in fashion. That is, if you agree, you will say that is very important. This idea of modesty in dress for religions, but at the same time, Catholicism has also introduced the idea of magnificence, not for people, normal people, but especially for liturgical offices. So it's paradoxical, and very often in Catholic Church there are paradoxical elements. So in a way we are modest. You have to present yourself as with modesty in dress. So you have not to appear too much. I mean, too much rich. Let's say too much rich in dress and clothes. But at the same time, for offices, for religious offices, you can even use gold everywhere in every vestments and so on and so on. So we created. I would say that the Catholic Church, especially after the Council, the Trento Council, created this idea of luxury in dress and clothes because of the liturgy, and so we live. I think that in Catholicism we live with this tension between modesty, but at the same time we know exactly what is luxury in dress and vestments because of the liturgy.
And any spiritual background, like meaning?
Right, the background of the modesty is to show yourself as you are and not as you would like to be, and this is spiritual way to be humble.
Okay, so the clothes in Islam is really important. Like human needs to cover their body.
Yes, I think everybody wants to hear about this.
Yeah, but
because that's quite controversial from the point of view of a stranger who is out of Islam.
Yeah, it's for men and women. Both of them should wear appropriate clothes, not suggestive clothes to what beneath. So as a man, I cannot trying to show my body to people. I have a good muscles, a strong body. This is prohibited in Islam. Same thing for women. They are not supposed to wear like tight clothes so people can see what beneath, or very suggestive clothes that can be provocative to some, I would call it sick men who would like to look or stare at this body of parts. So they should wear appropriate clothes. Definitely it should be a modest clothes. Islam recognizes that everyone would like to wear nice clothes with nice colors, which is perfectly fine, but you shouldn't take that part as a social status, or I'm wearing this type of clothes so I'm better than these people. Or so the clothes have a social and practical rule is to cover yourself, not more, not less. Even the Prophet himself didn't have many clothes. He just had two gelbab, which is the old Arabic clothes at the time. So when he wear one, the other was washed. When the other is washed, he wears a second. So it's not like really fancy thing. And he was like the role model, having very few. So we should follow that step. It's the same thing, as I said, apply to men and women. So it's not really like men have to wear whatever they want, and women have really strictly wearing some stuff, even covering the hair. In the old traditions, men also used to cover their hair, and it was part of their honor that they cover their hair until after the Second World War, when people start to remove the hats. But also men, like if you see the old photos of men in the Arabian culture, all of them will be covering their hair. Everyone should cover their hair or his hair.
Does it have any spiritual meaning when you cover hair? Because everybody is covering head in all our traditions.
I don't. The only reference that I can find spiritual is that part of the person's honor that they cover themselves. If you go to the church, you will find Miriam's covering. You will find all the old photos that come to us from the people, they cover themselves. And also because they used to live in the Arabia, where it's a desert and it's not really accessible, people have to have a shower every day. So to cover yourself is that to protect your hair from the dust, from all this around things, so you can protect yourself in a way. We still continue to preserve that, and there's still many interpretations from many scholars say that okay, you should still cover yourself as part of the tradition or part of the text.
If I go to an office and I'm a Muslim woman and I wear a hijab, what should I demonstrate by that, or should I take it off because I'm in the office?
For the women, it's part of it's called, we call it the women jurisprudence. There's now wide consensus among the scholars who specialize in that. I'm not specialized in that domain. But there's wide consensus among them saying that women should cover their hair all time for foreign people as part of their chastity, and to not to provoke other people to look to them and so on. But for me, I believe that whatever the woman can read from the text and she can understand, then she can apply. So if she understands that she should cover her hair, that's fine. If she shouldn't cover her hair and should wear appropriate clothes, okay, it's up to her. That's what I believe personally. But among the scholars in the field, there's a wide consensus that women should cover their hair.
I mean, in my community, not only ALF, but in general, I think the main idea is common sense. There are certain contexts where it's important to wear suit and be smart, and it's another way of clothing, way on the beach or going hiking. And we're not that much interested in segregating the genders. Like there's a male mode fashion, and this is female fashion. In liberal Judaism, we actually, for us, it's important to give people space to decide themselves what is appropriate for them. And of course, it's a lot of trust. The people who come not in inappropriate clothing into the synagogue, usually it works because at a certain point you're understanding common sense functions. But in general, the rules of how you behave and what clothes you wear, they're pretty Western nowadays in Jewish community. What is maybe important to note in comparison to magnificency of Catholic Church, we don't have a uniform for clergy in Judaism, and it's also a signal that we are all more or less equal. Of course, there are people who are more knowledgeable, have degrees and this and that, but any person who has enough knowledge can lead the service, for example, or deliver a speech. You don't have to be a rabbi for this. Even for the wedding, by the way, you don't have to be a rabbi to officiate. This kind of at least in theory, this basic democratic understanding that people are equal in the community is also represented by the way what we wear. That's why, especially when it's about fights, about equality between the genders, there are some ritual wear, like talit, which is a ritual scarf shawl that you wear. Traditionally, it's only for men. And it's very symbolic now, although there's nothing really against women wearing it in the tradition. It's only tradition but not law. But it becomes a very political issue, fighting against this modern idea of equality. And there are women who are proactively doing it. They're wearing talit in the synagogue, wearing kippah, by the way, in the synagogue as well, to show that they belong to the community as active as a man can belong.
Okay, thank you. Let's move on. And one thing definitely we all have in common is that we all pray. And prayer is a spiritual experience, and we pray to unite in purpose. In Judaism, they say that a prayer could be a service of the heart when you recite prayers with belief and convictions, and the prayer of lips when you recite prayers and doesn't believe in it. So, what is a prayer in your religion tradition? How and when do you learn to pray? And what is the proportion of circular and holy time in your religious traditions?
Well, it's a matter of definition, I think, coming to the second question. What is secular, what is... I think for many religious people, you're always with God. Doesn't matter whether you were in the toilet, especially from a Jewish perspective. Also, bodily functions are divinely regulated or inspired, and that's why there's also prayer after going to the toilet. It's just one example that how it works. So I don't know. I don't know if it's really a question, secular, holy. Of course, there are special times like holidays, Shabbat, special times when you celebrate certain things where it's more maybe intensive. But there is no really, from a religious perspective, there is no really sharp distinction between holy and secular.
But what is prayer?
The prayer, there are so many types of prayer. There is a petitionary prayer, I want to say something, but the main point, at least from the Jewish perspective, it's self-reflection. Lead palel in Hebrew, to pray, means to examine yourself. So it's not necessarily asking somebody, like God or usually God, to do something, but it's more about reflecting on certain ideas, certain values. In a way, also meditative practice, especially since you traditionally pray in Hebrew, and many people don't understand Hebrew, and they use it as a kind of a mantra to be in a certain spiritual state of mind, hopefully regularly, so there are regular times of prayer. Yeah, so I mean, there are two things that are important. On one hand, there's, as you said, service of the leap service in the negative sense. On the other hand, you cannot be always completely immersed and understand every word you're saying, and so it's kind of both things are important. On one hand, discipline, that you're repeating things even if you don't understand them. Like in sports, you have to train yourself before you reach a certain level when you enjoy and understand what's going on. The same thing with religion as well, the religious practice in general.
And your religious tradition?
Yeah, for Catholicism, I will say that there are sacraments, I told you before, for marriage, and the sacraments, as the Mass, one of the most known sacraments, is a kind of prayer, but it's not just a prayer, it's an action, a thankfulness prayer, and a thankfulness action that is not exactly what we can think about prayer. So for Catholicism, we use too much, let me say, we use too much the idea of prayer for sacraments and for some actions that are not specifically prayer. So I will say that there are action, really holy action, even if in a real and well-grounded theology of Christianity, there's no anymore holy and secular. So we reintroduce these ideas, but they are not, since the death of Jesus, there's no any separation between holy and secular. There are just, life, and in life God also with His grace. But if I have to tell exactly for prayer, I would say that there is an inner prayer that can go through the mystical prayer, that is a heart prayer. So let me say that there are prayers, and in this kind of prayers there are the heart prayer and the mystical prayer, but there is a part of prayer also in the sacraments. And the sacraments are the fundamentals of the life of community.
And how do you learn to pray? Do you teach your children from the beginning how to pray? Or is it learned by experience?
We try. We try both, as I said, by attending masses, because in Catholicism the normal way to pray is a mass, even if it's not really the core. Of course, Mass, Eucharist is a core, theologically speaking, but it's not just do a mass for do everything. So we, by attending a mass, but trying also to say some prayers by the lips, and it's an education. The prayer. I'm a Dominican brother since 30 years. I can say that I know exactly what is prayer, not because I can say what is theologically speaking, but the core of prayer is a mystery.
Okay, mystery.
Okay, so in Islam it's a little bit complicated than that. So, prayers mean salah, and salah means connection. So it comes from the word sila, and sila means connection. So you make a connection with the God when you pray, when you do the salah. It consists of different things. So it's hard, and we know that's hard because it includes physical effort. So you have to stand, and then you have to bend, and then you have to sit on the floor, and then you have to repeat that 4 times. Sometimes you have to 4 times, and then you have to repeat the prayers for 5 times a day. So we know that this is really hard. So usually the Prophet encouraged the Muslims to start teaching the kids at the age of 7. So at the age of 7, kids start to do the movements. Maybe they don't understand what these movements about or what this doesn't reflect, but they have to do it in a certain with adults. What is the prayer exactly? It includes different types. So it could include dua, which is also like to call God whatever you want, to ask Him the heaven, to ask Him to protect you from the devil.
The conversation with God. God as a friend.
Yeah, the conversation. It includes the Quran, so you have to read the Quran, and it includes also tasbih, which is like to have to mention God in a certain way that's not mentioned in the Quran, but it's the Prophet has teach us how to do it. The proportion of prayers, the prayers is always on the day. So we pray 5 times a day, which is the full prayers, but between them we have the tasbih, we have the dua. You always have to have your connection with God. Because the idea of prayers that God don't need these prayers. We need it so we can continue our relationship with Him. It's like, as I told you before, it's like you have a car and then the agency told you that we will give you 5 times a day free maintenance. So every time you go to a trip with the car, you go to the agency so they can fix it. The same thing, it's like you have always a relationship with the manufacturer who manufacture you and know what's the problem within you. And then the prayer can fix what's wrong happened with you, with this manager, with your wife, with your children, and then it give you more peaceful and relaxing mind to continue. That's why we can believe in all prayers. Yeah.
So interesting. So we all pray, and some people say that art is also prayer, like prayer through action. Because God is everywhere, and we are praying by portraying beautiful things in life, singing, dancing, painting. Is there any place for creativity in your religions?
I mean, the easy answer is yes, of course. Because, well, this is not only in Judaism, I think it's quite a universal idea that we should imitate God. And one of the things that God is source of creativity, and He's the artist of the world. So we are trying to do the same on a probably much smaller scale, but also religious service should be static, so it's not just doing things
obligatory things.
Yeah, just to do it, but to do it with the proper intention, which is also beauty. Aesthetically, that's why you use also nice clothing, if you're talking about clothing, or nice objects in the synagogue. So you can of course pray at home, which is also nice, maybe more spiritual, but you should go to the synagogue because it's much more beautiful space hopefully being together with people also brings some beauty to this. Singing together brings beauty. So yeah, that's how it's.
Okay, so do you sing during your services? Do you sing prayers?
Yeah, we sing prayers, we use music. Sometimes it's even possible to use all kind of visual arts. Not possible in our synagogue, but some synagogues are using lights and all kinds of new creative things. Traditional way, of course, is much more settled and less show oriented. But yeah, music is important. Music is also religious in essence.
Part of a prayer. So art is a prayer.
It can be prayer, not always prayer, or not always religious expression, but it can be.
To follow the Creator. Anything else to add?
Yeah, I just want to add it. In Islam, we cannot make some creativity related to the prayers or fasting or something. But the Muslims, they have celebrations beside the prayers. So it's not part of the prayers, but they do celebrations. So we celebrate the Prophet's birth, we celebrate Jesus' birth, we celebrate also for Moses the day where he passed the sea, and we connect that to food sometimes. So for example, for the day for the Moses, we have this Ashura, we eat some type of food with milk, and so on. So we have this things related to food and creativity, but to sing, it should always. People are very cautious to edit singing or dancing to prayers or to do this inside the mosque, except like really restricted, because they don't want to go over the debate, is this religious or not, because we shouldn't do anything in the religion except what we have been taking from the Prophet directly. So it's a really sensitive part, but other than that, you can do, as long as you don't say this is a prayer or this God ordered me to do this, you can do it, and you can do it outside, but not inside the mosque. Yeah.
Some restrictions in creativity.
Yeah.
Okay, let's go business a little bit, because let's speak about qualities we explore a lot nowadays, and one of the qualities is leadership. If you know that there are many examples of leadership traits in the lives of the prophets. Despite the knowledge that Abraham would be the father of a great nation, he was never arrogant. So we could say that his motto was a true leader must live humbly and display humility even if no one is watching. So what would be the traits of a true contemporary leader to your mind?
I will give just an example of Pope Francis. I mean, he has a free speeches. I mean, he tries and he succeeds in saying things without, in a very friendly way, without any compromise, and by his charisma, what we can say charisma, is leading Catholic Church. It's not so simple for him, because a lot of Catholics don't like or dislike this kind of new approach, and also with a real humanity. So let me say that in theoretically speaking, but I can give his example: freedom and intelligence and sensitiveness.
And I know that Pope Francis, he was one of the initiators of interfaith dialogue. Is that right?
I mean, he's very convinced, historically speaking, he's not one of the founders. We are all founders of interreligious dialogue, but interreligious dialogue, as we know, even in this event, it's 50 years ago, 60 years ago, from a Catholic point of view, of course, the Second Vatican Council has given a very important influence for diffusing the idea and the idea and the perspective of interreligious dialogue. Till that time, it was the origin of the Catholic Church. And of course, this idea of openness is also part of the leadership. I mean, leadership is not just religious leadership. I mean, the challenge today is a real leadership, religious or political, because we need real leadership.
And in your religious traditions, who is a leader, or who should be a real contemporary leader of a company, of a community? What are the traits of a leader based on what we've got in the scriptures and based on what we are facing now?
I think there's a lot of skepticism about leadership in Judaism. We're not centralized. We're decentralized. There are a lot of jokes about, I don't know, 2 Jews, 3 opinions, or 5 political parties. The more, like from the traditional perspective, from the theological perspective, Moses is very often perceived as a role model in the sense that Moses is an example of humility, first of all. Second of all, this service orientation to the community. But also, with all due respect, that he's very respected in Judaism, he's not perfect. So no leader can be a perfect example of leadership or wisdom or knowing people. So every leader, Moses including, should be ready for criticism and for constructive relationship with the people whom he or she is leading. That's maybe one of the ways. I mean, we don't really have this idea of Pope or Chief Rabbi, or the every Chief Rabbi.
How is your religion organized? You mentioned that you don't have a specific structure. So what's the organization?
It's a network type of organizations. It's less hierarchical. It's more coordination. But there's a lot of, at least in liberal sense, liberal communities. There's a lot of trust in rabbis that they know what to do, and individual rabbis have quite wide spectrum of powers, what they can do, of course with the support of the community. They very often, it depends very often on charisma of the rabbi and so on. But there's not much you can find on the level of policies and hierarchies.
And what's the source of this pure water? Do you find it in the Bible? What's the foundation of your work as a rabbi?
You mean like the source
leading
of
the community, yes.
A lot of things. I mean, of course, it's about training, it's about life experience, it's about assuming responsibility. It's not like opening the book and finding an answer. This is not really possible, even from a very orthodox perspective. We're not the people of the book, we're people of the books. And we're also very critical about the books you're reading, so it's a very complex issue.
I think in Islam, leadership has 2 sides. So it's part related to the leader and part related to the people whom he will lead or she will lead. So the first and most thing should be honest, because if you can deceive some people sometimes, you cannot deceive all the people all the time. It's not a political process where you promise people some things that you cannot do. When you say I will do, you should do. And then you should be patient with people. So people have needs that you should accommodate, as long as these needs are legitimate and not against the texts in the Quran. You should deal with them with care, and you should take the initiative. So it's not just you wait people to come to you. So if there is something that need to be changed, you should be the one who lead and takes the steps to do that. And the last thing regarding the leader himself is the trust. So if the leader have a problem of trusting people and trusting the others, then he cannot lead. A hero cannot be a hero without himself. He needs heroes with him, and then they become heroes. And same thing, the leader needs leaders beneath him so they can lead with him. The only guide or the only man show is not acceptable in Islam. So you will find even the prophet, and then you will find his accompanier with him. All the prophets you will find them that way. All the great nations you will find the leader, and then you will find leaders beneath him, lead with him. And that will take us to the rule of the people. And in Islam, as Judaism, we don't have centralized, so we don't have someone who can say that this is the one represent Islam. So we need a consensus. And the consensus is based on all what I believe to be the previous ideas: trust, the honesty, the care, the patience with the people, and then you can build the consensus around this person. That's how I see leadership in Islam from my perspective.
Persuasion, not really for, I don't know, armies and so on, because we don't really have any.
Yes, I mean, it's important to say that is what I said is the Catholic model, very centralized and with a very important figure who is the Pope. But in the other Christianity denominations, the leadership is totally different. Especially in Protestantism or Evangelical. Of course, the leadership is still important because of the idea of a religious leadership, but much more local than centralized worldwide Pope for every Catholic. So, and when it is important to stress this point, because we talk too much about Christianity as it's an whole thing, and it means that if we do comparisons between Catholic Protestantism and Orthodoxy, for example, we can see that as a matter of fact, Christianity can assume different hermeneutics, different interpretation, different positions. And I can say this even as a Catholic. I mean, thank God we have a Pope, but it's not the only one position for Christianity. So.
And it's about freedom of speech, I would say, and about negotiations. The Bible gives a lot of examples of the spirit of argument and discussion and giving ideas freely. Like when Abraham was talking to God, when God said, you remember the case of Sodom and Gomorrah, when God Abraham negotiated with God to protect his people, and actually it was negotiation with the authority. So it was about this freedom of talking with the authority. So what's the attitude towards the freedom of speech and negotiation in your religions?
In Islam, as I understand it, freedom of speech is limited. A Muslim cannot insult other people's God. Definitely, he or she cannot insult Moses, Jesus, Abraham, Noah, all these descendants of the same hierarchy. He cannot descend. But also the immunity goes to if someone is praying to a cow or to a fire. This animal or this thing has an immunity from being insulted or being harmed in any way, as long as there is no harm happens from it or from the people who are following this religion. So as long as we are in peace, we cannot say, oh, this cow or oh, this. Even in the Egyptian culture, they have a very famous proverb. They say if you see someone praying to a cow, gives a cow some food. Because it's not the problem of the cow that he's praying to her, it's the cow, so you should give her some food. And then and that's sometimes for the West they don't understand, because we cannot insult other people's religion. So sometimes people don't understand why are you insulting our prophet? We don't insult yours. So why are you doing that? But I would like to clarify that the punishment for even like someone insult my religion is not to kill him or to kill her. It's just once you feel that someone is insulting your religion, don't stand in that debate. Just you have to leave. That's what Quran is saying explicitly. Once you see someone is mocking your religion, making some fun of it, you don't participate in that. But what I can see is that I see what some Muslims doing when like the caricature happens about the Prophet. I can understand their emotions, their love to the Prophet, but sometimes I feel like, okay, this is more than what we're supposed to do. It's very extra that you shouldn't do it. What you should do is that don't participate, boycott, say that what you're doing is wrong, educate them, tell them that we don't do that to you, so you don't have to do that to us. And also, we have this respect to, so if you, to the older people, so you cannot, and usually the leaders in our country are old, so they say, oh, I'm your father, don't insult me. So that you find sometimes some social restrictions regarding insulting like the political figure, because mostly they are old. So I'm like, I'm your father, I'm going to insult your father. So it's like, they take it from that perspective. But I think that everything should be based on mutual respect, not mutual insult. Because if we start to insult each other, we're not going to end with anything good. It's just we start to talk in reason, in mind, and then I think it should be fine. So that's why I believe Islam would have some restriction on freedom of speech in that sense, not to insult others and not to be rude to others. And that's how I see it.
Okay. And what about your religious traditions? How do you approach the freedom of speech? Is it
according to Catholicism, we are not exactly free to say, I mean, I would define precisely the idea of we are not free to say something that is against doctrine or moral elements. But when I say I'm not free to, it's not that it's an obligation, a divine obligation. I mean, you are not invited to spread out ideas that are not in the unity of doctrine and moral elements. In this case, I mean, I see the traditional elements. Today we are more free than before, and every Catholic, if he is or she is a little bit intelligent, feels free to say what he or she is thinking. But theoretically speaking, and according to the tradition, we are not really free to say something against doctrine or moral doctrines, and we can understand why, because we are unity, we are together. So if someone begins to say something against, is not, or we are not anymore together in this unity. But in a total different perspective, for example, I'm thinking about the sacrament of confession. In confession, that is I think it's quite a Catholic thing, or just Catholic thing. In this space that is very special and very space, a believer can say whatever he thinks, whatever he feels. So it's a real space of free speech. And this, I want to stress this idea of free speech space as the confession. We have ideas that are not very good about confessions, because we think about just sins, but it's a real space of freedom.
I mean, there's no absolute freedom of speech even in the non-religious society, let's say. From the Jewish perspective, debate is very important, but it should be l'shem shamayim, which means for the sake of heaven, which means it should not be derogatory to the person whom you having a dispute with, and it should not lead to harm in a sense for the sake of the harm, because of course sometimes you have to harm the person because of punishment or whatever reasons. So it's not always being peaceful and loving everybody. Sometimes it's really hard debate, but it should be somehow connected to the higher value. Denigrating others just for the sake of denigrating is very traditionally it's understood as a form of murder. So it's not acceptable. At the same time, depending of course on the community within Jewish communities. In liberal communities there is more space for debates. You can debate almost everything, even the existence of God or different definitions of what God is. There are other communities where certain questions are not debated. So it's really about a consensus. We're talking about consensus as well. What is reasonable, what is decency in that particular community. But to be free to express yourself, I think it's one of the most important teachings of Judaism.
Anything else we add? No? We're moving on?
Yes.
Okay, so I like the sense of humor in people. What's the attitude to humor in your religions, and do you make jokes on yourselves?
The Dominicans may make jokes about Jesuits, and Jesuits make jokes about Dominicans and so on.
Can you think of any joke?
For example, Dominican. The real name of Dominicans order is preacher. We are preacher in our history. So when a preacher goes to preach, God doesn't know what a Dominican will say as a sermon. He can understand when he pronounced this sermon, but for a Jesuit that is not very good for Jesuits. He doesn't know what a Jesuit will say in the sermon, and doesn't know even after the sermon what he has said. But in a more theological way, there is a paradox also in this subject, because Christianity is a religion of joy, but we didn't have along the story, the history more well said, a lot of humor. Even Jesus is not depicted as a prophet of humor in the gospel. We have some details, and we can understand the gospel has some humor, but that's why in the history of Christianity the idea is that humor or even joy has not the first place, but it is in contradiction with the faith of joy that is resurrection. So another paradox, another not contradiction. I love this idea of paradox, that is life also paradox.
Quite philosophic. Yes.
Yeah, I can't do otherwise.
And in your religious traditions, what's the place for humor?
In religion, I think Islam is not really, as a religion, is not really with humor in religion. So it's really direct and explicitly banning people from making fun of anything that God said or the Prophet said. But that doesn't mean that they cannot make fun of their lives. So you'll find, like, for example, the Egyptians They make fun of themselves, based on the district. So you will find if you tell someone I'm from this district, they will keep telling you jokes about these districts, about people from these districts, and then so on. So, for example, I'm from the south, so people make a lot of jokes about the south. And how they are like really sometimes very slow understanding because of the hot, so sometimes they need to be very direct, so unless you're very direct they will not understand what they want to mean, so sometimes they're really not like taking like that, it's not sharp because it's hot, so you need to be very direct to them, so people make some jokes on them. Some other people from the north, they are like greedy, so they keep making jokes about greedy and how they are greedy. But all the jokes are about the social part, the economic part, maybe the physical part sometimes, but not about the religion. So people try to, okay, no, not about that part, because the Quran is really explicitly saying that don't make jokes about this. Even not to make jokes about other religions. So I cannot make jokes about Christianity or Judaism. I cannot do that. So the immunity includes all the religions. Yeah.
I like the joke when a Muslim is wearing a t-shirt saying that if you don't believe in Jesus, you're not a Muslim.
Yeah, of course.
But that's true, no?
Yes, because you have to believe in all prophets. You cannot say I believe in Muhammad, I'm not believing in Jesus, or I believe in Jesus and I don't believe in Moses. Even the Quran is not telling us all the prophets. So, and the Quran is making explicitly that God has sent to every nation a prophet. But what we know is very limited number. So we should believe in whatever. So some scholar will say, some scholar will say, for example, that Buddha is a prophet, but we don't know about him. Maybe the religion was corrupted afterward. So we just take it as it is. What we know is what has been mentioned in the book, and the other we don't know. So we just accept it as it is.
I mean, I think the tricky question is, what about Jesus you believe in? It's not about believing in Jesus, but what specifically you believe in. And this is the point of difference. I mean, there are a lot of Jews who appreciate Jesus, but from a very different perspective.
And come
on
back
one
to
hand,
humor.
we believe in the thing, but not really.
Yeah.
Same guy, but not really. Humor, I don't know. Humor is very famous.
Yes, yes, please.
That does mean that every rabbi is a humorist. In my community, we have a person who is responsible for this. It's just became a tradition because of COVID, when we started Zoom prayers. In the beginning, there's always a joke, then there's a service, and then at the end, there's also another joke. So it's not necessarily Jewish jokes, but some fun, just to bring people a little bit more.
Is it in the character of Jewish people to live with the humor?
I mean, there are very, I don't know. It's depending on the temperament. So my grandfather was very into jokes. My father is not. So it's just.
Do you know any? Can you remember a joke about like the Jewish people or not Jewish people? Like some funny story.
Well, the last joke that I heard in the synagogue is a young man comes to the synagogue, and at the end of the service, he asks another guy who is more older than he is, asks, "What time is it now?" And this guy doesn't say anything. And he said, maybe he thinks, maybe he cannot hear. I said this again, "What time is it?" So he asks it several times. He ignores him completely. He tries again at the entrance. In the exit of the synagogue and so on. At some point, this older gentleman is a knock for him, and he says, "It's 8:30. And then the younger gentleman asks, "Why didn't you tell me from the beginning?" "Well, you will ask me what time is it now. Then you will ask whether you'd like to invite me at home. The next thing you will meet my daughter. You would like to marry her. Why do I need a son-in-law who cannot afford a watch?"
Yes, okay. I thought you would be telling us a joke about a Jewish mom, because the Jewish mom is something really specific.
Yeah, what's the difference between, but it can be also Italian mom.
Yeah, right.
What's the difference between Jewish mother and a terrorist?
Okay, so what's the difference?
You can negotiate with the terrorist. There is a version of it with the terrorist.
I know it.
Okay, all right. And let's talk a little bit about social actions, because we're always busy with something. We're always busy with praying or doing something for our improving ourselves. However, we're not just the religions of philosophical reflections. We need to do something for the society, like about diversity, equality, building relationships. And what's the part of social actions in your religions?
It's extremely important, theoretically speaking, and in this case, practically speaking. It's quite evident that not just Catholic Church, but in Catholic Church we have a lot of social actions in terms especially of what we call charity, and charity recovers also the idea of hospitality, and to try to give people dignity. And this is the real idea of charity in terms of, because charity is the love of God in Christian theological terms. And then there is a practical dimension of the charity that is a social action, is the reflection of love of God celebrated in church, in prayer, in the love of a community. And then you have also the practical dimension of the love of God in charity. And charity is the other way to give people dignity with clothes, with money, with possibilities to succeed in the life, and so on and so on. And I'm quite proud that in Catholic Church we are not close to do this just with Catholic people.
I would definitely share a lot of things with the Catholic regarding that, but we go more than that. In Islam, we don't. The government is not a core of it. So the core is the people and what they decide, and then the government has very limited rule. So it's not like here, when you are sick, you go to the government. When you are poor, you go to the government. Unemployed, you go to the government. You should go first to the family, to the tribe, to the community, and then at last you go to the government to give you from the zakat. So we have the zakat, which is the money that everyone should pay, which is 2.5% of your savings, not of your income. So after you pay all your bills and you have this money that you don't use, instead of putting in the bank, and you put it in the bank for 1 year, then you pay 2.5 of this, and this is the zakat. This is what the government supposedly should take. And then we have the sadaqat, which is the charity, and this should be paid by the Muslims. They can pay to the government if the government is taking care of this stuff like the unemployed. But if this government is not taking of that, then they should do it by themselves, by their own initiative. This is how I can see the social action. So everything is about the society. It is not to be imposed by someone. As I said, it should be the initiative of the leader sometimes. And the leader of the community has an initiative to, okay, we need to fix this road. Then the people, okay, we're going to save to do that. Or we want to tree this road. Or we want to help this person to get this very expensive medication. And so on. Like the oldest university in Egypt is Al-Azhar. It was built in the 9th century, and it's based on the charity. It's based on the endowment that has been funding it for more than a millennia now. And I assume the same thing will be in Italy, and so on. So it's about the people acting, not depending on the government, taking from the people and then paying back to the people. Because it's like having a medium in the between, which is the government, and this should be the case. This is how we can see it. or how I see it.
Yeah, there's a lot to say about it from a Jewish perspective. Maybe one most important thing is that Judaism is mostly concerned with what happens in this life. What happens after we die. It's a nice maybe topic for all kinds of speculations, but our focus, at least from mainstream Judaism, is to make this life livable, that people really can say they're not just existing, they live. And that's why the society has certain responsibilities to make things functioning. And whether it's NGOs or government structures, it's a good question, but even the government is a form of communal infrastructure. So that's depending obviously on political ideology within Judaism as well. There will be more social democrats or more neoliberal people. So it's less clear, for example, you describe it. But the most important thing, I guess, is that we are preaching all the time is that every Jew has a responsibility to, at least, I mean, it doesn't have to be, you don't have to be a revolutionary of the universe, but at least to do something for the betterment of the society in general, but also the environment as well. So it's not only about human beings, but we're all talking about climate change and all these issues. It's also part of this tikkun olam, which is repairing the world. The big idea is that God created human beings, Jews including, to make this world a better place. And this is really a partnership between God and us to make it a little bit more better functioning.
What's the attitude to inclusion, diversity, equality in your religions? Because this is also part of social action.
I mean, it depends on the political context. In Europe, Jewish communities are not really active because we have very developed state with a lot of social infrastructure, and in the United States there is a different political culture. There are lots of based on private initiatives, NGOs, bringing people together and doing, not waiting until, I don't know, government does it. So it's, I don't think it's specifically, always specifically theology around or has some theological background. It's also the way how this particular society works. And it's sort of across religions. It's not only Judaism or Christianity. I mean, Christianity in the United States is also quite different from Christianity.
Okay. Anything else to add, Hina?
The idea of inclusion is part of Islam. So, because the early Muslims, most of them were the poor, the slaves. So the idea of equality between them was the core of things. People start to convert to Islam because of this idea that the master is equal to the slave, more rights to the slaves. Clothing, like before Islam, there was 23 sources of slavery. Islam just made it one, and other sources were abolished. The son of the masters have this tragedy, like my father is a master, but I cannot be free man. Islam ended that, so once you have a child from a slave woman, then the child is free. So the idea of equality started to grow since the day one, that all people are equal, no difference between white and black, Arab and Arab. Like I cannot say because the Prophet was Arab or the Abrahamic, and I'm better than the other. I cannot say that. I have no social status different than any other one. And then you have to include other people, even non-believers. So Islam encourages people, like if a non-believer comes seek refuge, you have to include them because they don't know and you have to take care of them. So this idea are within the Islamic theory of of society and legal perspective, and how I can see it.
We are now in Luxembourg, and Luxembourg is a good role model of a host country, and there are people of so many nations from so many countries living here. Are there any challenges for interfaith relationships in Luxembourg? Do you feel any challenges? Yeah.
I believe in Luxembourg. It's very fine. Like my professor here was atheist, and he was gay, and I'm Muslim, and maybe I consider myself liberal, but he will see me as conservative. So, but I didn't find any problem dealing with him or he dealing with me. So it was really fine to communicate and. His personal life to him and my personal life to myself, and then we have our discussion about mutual things, or even like different things. Like he would ask me about how we receive Islam and how he would replace religion with human rights as a moral background to himself as an atheist. And so on. So I felt like it was really friendly environment, not really hostile, where we shouting at each other regarding the differences, but more we were trying to understand each other more, and then like drinking wine, in my understanding, would be not permitted. Eating pork is not permitted. Having a relationship with a woman that's not your wife is not permitted. Having a relationship with the same sex is not permitted, but if you commit it, it's up to yourself, and I'm not here to judge you or you judge me. Everyone of us has his own sin, so everyone should take care of himself. And in that part, I quote the Quran, and we're like, all the people who you believe, you should be aware of yourself, and don't get distracted, and don't keep saying this is what he's doing, and so be aware of yourself. And you should not get any harm. So that's how I feel it here. So everyone is trying to know about the other, trying to learn from the other in a certain way. I was working here at the university for 5 years, and then now I'm working in Germany. But my work is more in Germany, is international law, so there's not much interface discussion about it. But that's how I can see it in Luxembourg. Yeah.
I think that it's twofold interesting here in interfaith dialogue, not just in order to know each other, that is well spread out all over Europe, this kind of events. This is the first dimension, and there are quite a lot events in Luxembourg about interfaith dialogue. Maybe not too much, not too many, but there are. I'm thinking, for example, the kind of interreligious marathon. In the marathons, there are interreligious people, interreligious group, and they run together. But I think that the challenge of interfaith dialogue here is in order to how to deal with modernity and post-modernity. I mean, we are in a country that is even much more modern than some other European countries. It's grounded in a tradition, but I mean, it's at the same time very well developed in this idea of modernity and post-modernity. So how we can be together for understanding the religious challenges in this country, in a postmodern country, in a modernity. That is, I think that it's much more here in Luxembourg than somewhere else. We can do a good job.
Okay.
I mean, there are two different things, I think. Dialogue usually implies that there are more or less equal parties involved, and it's really going into deep discussions and not just living side by side and respecting each other, just living side by side. For this, of course, you need relationship, you need trust, you need a common language. There are some people who are quite skeptical about dialogue, especially on theological issues, because we are so different, and it just wastes of time. Huh?
And we are.
And we are. And it's just maybe just knowing each other, but not really developing some kind of a common ground. So there are some people who are saying, well, let's maybe just cooperate on certain issues. I don't know, saying equality or charity, charitable projects, and of course you carry your baggage with yourself. Especially, we are very diverse here, even within the communities, and the readiness to talk to others, even within your own community, is not always high. I experience, for example, with the Muslim community here, very often they're really more involved at this moment to finding common ground within the Muslim community than approaching others, for example, which is normal. I mean, it's natural natural development of a community. So it's very dynamic, and we'll see.
That's why we are organizing such events like today's, because to find understanding, we need at least to know each other and to look into the eye. Well, you are all from 3 different religions. And was the religion selected by you, or was it given by birth? And what do you hold really close to your heart? What do you hold dear in your religion? What do you think that this is an important thing? Well, okay.
I can start if you would like. Okay, so in Islam, you are Muslim because you said you are Muslim. So once you say that there is no God except one God, you are Muslim. So there is no ceremony, there is no procedure, there is no someone can evaluate your level of belief or not. You can just go to ask someone to lead you, you need to know, what you need to do, and so on. But to become a Muslim is just you declare that you are a Muslim, you believe in God, and you believe in His Prophet. You don't differentiate between the Prophet, and so on. So theoretically, you should choose your religion once you get adult. And the idea of adult is really controversial because in the old Arabia, the adults are from the age of 13. So you are completely understanding what you are doing at 13. Today is 21, some countries 18, and so on. So, but what happens socially now is that people, okay, I am a Muslim, and my son will become a Muslim automatically. But in Islam, it's not that way. Everyone should, even the woman, the man, the daughter, everyone should decide their religion freely. No compulsory in religion. Definitely, if the son or the father decide to change their religion or not to, okay, I'm not a Muslim, then this have some consequences, like especially financial consequences. So if a son say, okay, I'm not going to be a Muslim, I want to be atheist, at that point, as Islam asks that the relationship continue between the father and the son, but yet there is no financial relationship. So the son will not inherit from his father, the father cannot support his son in certain ways. So it should have some consequences. But definitely the son should decide his or her religion, the daughter was. And also I can see that also in like our social life. So if a person like in our culture, the father supports the son in the marriage and the daughter in the marriage. But if the son or the daughter decided to choose different persons that the father or the family is not agreeing on, then the child takes the decision that, okay, I want this person and I will not take your money, but I'm going to take my decision as I want it, and I'm taking the full responsibility of it. So the same thing, like if you're taking a marriage or you're changing your religion, you should know that there is no financial support to you if you're taking that side. That's how we can see it in the religious part. Yeah.
Is there anything which you really appreciate, you love about your religion?
Too many things. First thing I come to my mind is the freedom. Like it's free you from the fear from anything or someone or something. So you don't afraid from your manager to harm you because you know that God only harm you. And also you know that your relation to God is always direct, so you can talk to God and God can return. God will not talk to you, but we can send you some signs that what you're doing is right or what you're doing is wrong and you should change directions. So that's what really I respect and looking into in my religion, is how it's free us from the idols or from fear from something, and also there's a direct relationship that you can talk to God and you can always be in connection with it. That's how I can see it. Yeah.
What I love in my faith is the mystery of incarnation, Jesus as totally human and totally God, and this makes me appreciate the life that is totally material and totally divine. That's why, as I was saying before, there's no space for real separation between secular and holy. We are at the same time holy, and I ground this mystery of that material is also spiritual. There's no difference in a way, thanks to God, in the mystery of incarnation. So I'm still happy with my faith in the incarnation.
And is your religion, religious belief, is it inherited or is it
for myself or for myself?
Personally.
Of course, I come from a Catholic family. At the moment, at the end of my, when I was 18, when I was teenager, I was not so believer. I believe in God, but I wasn't so believer in paradise or afterlife. I remember that I was talking with my friend, a very good friend, that yes, I can believe in God, but not in this kind of life. And I was 16 or 17, and just 1 year after, I felt the vocation in God, and that at that moment I had a new, if I want, I would say that I felt that I had to renew my choice of the faith. So I think that in real believers, I don't like to categorize it like this. In real Christians believer, we must also renew with our tradition. We can't. It's not a faith. It's not a tradition. It can't be a tradition. It's a tradition. Thank God that we have a tradition, a religious tradition, but we have to renew our. And I'm still renewing every day, every moment my faith. It's not just. Otherwise, it's a dead faith.
For you, Rabbi Alexander.
I think I will be not that original. For me, a very important thing is this idea of freedom as well, and the direct connection to God, but it's also in a certain, for me personally, on the level of presence, like, that you're not alone, and God is always your fellow. And it's also very charming, I guess, to be part of such a long tradition. And although I disagree with many things that my predecessors said, but it's an interesting feeling of being part of this ongoing discourse and never-ending learning. Learning is very important in Judaism. Maybe this is also. I'm not trying to say that I'm so intelligent, or, but it's just something that inspired me to go deeper into it, because I'm not coming from a religious family.
So was it your conscious choice, the religion?
Yes. In modern world, it's always a conscious choice, because we are hopefully, especially in the West at least, we're not any longer in a situation that you have to be this or you have to be that, even if you're, well, there's a very simple rule: your mother is Jewish, you're Jewish, but on paper maybe, or maybe kind of in theory, but you have to make really an effort to become a Jew or to practice Judaism, to believe what you're doing. And parents is nice, and inheritance is nice, but it's, as one rabbi said, this is all zeros behind, but if there's no one, then you are just, if you're not there, then all these zeros is just nothing.
Nothing, yes. Interesting. I forgot to ask you one question. It's almost the end of our conversation for today, but you mentioned it, and I think it's important, about the learning, about the attitude to learning and self-development in your religions. You all mentioned that it's your conscious choice, and you have to prove it again and again during your life. But what's the place of learning, of self-development in your religion?
For Catholicism, history is catechism. It's a way for learning the basics of our doctrine, our faith, our elements. But of course, we don't like anymore to talk about catechism, even if we do, and here also for Italian Catholic community we do, and we have a lot of children. So catechism is the way to, and the Greek word is this one, is to be with people in order to learn the basics of your faith and the actions, and also life. So I would say that self-development is a modern word. So I won't say exactly this word, but learning about your own faith is also a way to become more and more human.
Okay. No, in that regard, I would quote the Prophet's wording when he said that wisdom is what the believer, not the Muslim, the believer should look for. And once the believer finds it, then he deserves it. So you should always look for the wisdom, knowledge, new things. You shouldn't be safe with what you know or what you have. Because the more you know, the more you will know that you know nothing. And at that point, you should know that the one who knows everything is God. And at that point, you can submit to His will. So always to seek knowledge and to seek learning is something within the basis of Islam, in my perspective.
Yeah, learning Judaism in general is even for the sake of learning, not practical. Learning in the sense of getting wisdom or knowing how to do this or that is a religious act, especially in the Ashkenazi tradition. So you're learning for the sake of learning because it's kind of a ritual thing. In some cases, it's even more important than prayer. So that's basically repeating what we all said.
And these words just prove that we all have a lot of things in common, right. a lot of traditions, a lot of values, really similar rather than different. So during this pandemic, We have been isolated from socializing, from communicating to people, and the goal of today's panel is to get together, to become more knowledgeable and about ourselves and about others, about our neighbors. I thank you very much, our panelists, for sharing your ideas, for talking about our common values, about your individual traditions. And I think that it is important not only to understand our differences, but at the same time not to lose our identity. And the more I believe and I learn about my religion, the more I value the rules of my neighbor. And each of us has responsibility for the life we live and for the world we share. Listen to our panelists. However, do not just be passive. Take action. Go back to people and do things differently. Because you are not insignificant, you are not small, you are important. So I thank you once again for participation, and I thank the audience for being with us today. And I want to finish our conversation by the words of Elie Wiesel. Mankind must remember that peace is not God's gift to his creatures. Peace is our gift to each other. Thank you for joining us today, and goodbye.